What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the CarolinaCast podcast, Season 2, Episode 4. We are back on here just a day away from Monday Night Football for the Carolina Panthers. But Week 3 of college football just passed by. We pretty much going through Week 2 of the NFL right now. We got Sunday Night Football going on in the background. I'm Chris Verma alongside Ryan Schlesinger. Welcome back to the CarolinaCast. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit the subscribe button. The CarolinaCast on the road to 2,000 subscribers. If you want to check us out on Instagram or TikTok, we are at CarolinaCast Sports. For Twitter/X, we are CarolinaCast_15. What is up, Ryan? I know you're a Giants fan, so that comeback, we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But, man, what a comeback by New York.
Yeah, we got the win today. Terrible first half, and then the offense woke up a little bit in the second half. Brian Dable must have said a lot to them in the locker room during halftime because they were being outscored on the season 60-0 in just 3 halves of football, and they had no points at all through the first 6 quarters of their season because they lost 40-0 to the. And then all of a sudden the defense comes alive. They only gave up 1 touchdown in that second half. They were actually making tackles. And the offense comes alive as well. The offensive line did a great job in the second half. And Daniel Jones, how about a performance for him? He got some rushing yards, and he was completing his passes. 2 big plays from Jalen Hyatt, over 80 yards from him on just 2 catches, and some big catches as well from Paris Campbell, Isaiah Hodgins, and Darius Slayton, and some big runs from Saquon before he got injured. And Darren Waller also had a nice day, too. I'm wearing my Waller jersey right now. But what a win for the Giants, and now they have some momentum because they actually look like the team that we thought they would be in the second half. So I'm very excited with them.
And, Ryan, I know you might remember this. Daniel Jones is known for his comebacks. Actually, his first ever New York Giants start, that game against the Buccaneers, New York was down by 18, came back and won the football game. This is one of the biggest comebacks in Giants history in recent memory. But before we get to some NFL Week 2 talk, we're going to start off with college football because we had a great week, especially once again going back to Ryan's team, the Florida Gators, upsetting the number 11 team in the country, moving up to 25 in the poll, and a lot more happened. I mean, a lot of teams were on the verge of an upset. Florida State barely got by Boston College by 2 points. Georgia was trailing South Carolina at halftime 14-3. They did come back to win. And then the Alabama quarterback situation is just, it's very concerning. Only beating South Florida 17-3 on the road. They had to turn to their 3rd string quarterback, still could not get anything out of it. And then, I mean, if you were not up at 2 a.m. on Saturday night watching the Colorado game, I mean, I definitely was. That was an incredible game where the Buffaloes, they beat their rivals in double overtime. Shadir Sanders got the job done. Travis Hunter, from what we heard, is going to be out for a few weeks. He took a big hit in the first quarter, and it was definitely a rivalry-type injury. That game was heated from the start to the end. It was just an incredible game. But, Ryan, let's start with that Florida game because Graham Mertz looked very solid for the Gators. And, dude, Trevor Etienne, I'm really excited to keep watching this dude during the regular season.
Yeah, the Gators look great, and that's very encouraging to see them win this game after starting off their season really, really bad against Utah when they were actually ranked in the top 25. They weren't ranked in the top 25, but they were playing Utah, ranked number 11, and Utah beat them 24-11. The offense just looked dead. And then now it seems like Graham Mertz has finally settled in a little bit, and a massive win over Tennessee. And they also beat McNeese State in their Week 2. Obviously a free win, but 49-7. Maybe that got them going a little bit in that guaranteed win game when they paid McNeese State to come to their house. But a massive win over an SEC opponent. And for Graham Mertz, 19 completions on 24 attempts. But yeah, you mentioned Trevor Etienne. It was all Trevor Etienne in this game. 23 carries for 172 yards. And Tennessee could just not stop Florida on the ground. Montreal Johnson, the backup, also had 12 carries for 23 yards and 1 touchdown. Etienne had a touchdown as well. But yeah, overall, Mertz looked very efficient. and ETN just dominated. He should maybe get drafted because I think he's flown under the radar a little bit around the college football world. He's definitely not bad, and he's more known as just being Travis Etienne's brother, but he's really got some talent, and I'd like to see him get drafted. I would not sleep on Trevor Etienne to maybe be like a top five in the top 5 rounds of the NFL draft when he declares for the draft, which is not too far away, maybe this year or next year. But I was actually not watching this game, but I did watch the highlights. I was at the Marlins game during this great Marlins win over the Braves. Jazz Chisholm with a grand slam and Jake Berger with a 2-run bomb. But yeah, Gators are looking good. I'm really excited about them. And maybe they can finally make some noise here because they just had their first great win against an actual high-quality opponent. And the schedule coming up soon looks really easy. They play Charlotte. They'll play Kentucky, Vanderbilt. Those are 3 games that they should probably win. Then it gets a little tougher down the stretch towards the end of the season. In October, they'll play South Carolina. They'll play Georgia. And then in November, they'll open up against Arkansas. And they'll go on the road to play LSU before they round out their schedule against Missouri. And then, of course, the rivalry game at their house against Florida State, who's looking really good with a win over Boston College this week, even though they were a little slow to get started in the first half.
Yeah, it was a very slow start for the Seminoles against Boston College, but we can come back to that in just a moment. I want to look at this from a Tennessee standpoint because it is very clear to me that they are still trying to find some talent on that offense. As we know, they lost Hendon Hooker to the draft. They lost Jalen Hyatt, who's now a New York Giant. And there are a lot of missing pieces on that offense for Tennessee. They're not that explosive. Like Hyatt was very explosive for Tennessee. They don't really have that wide receiver one that Hooker used to throw the ball to. I mean, I will give Joe Milton some credit. I mean, 287 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. That's a very solid stat line. But that Tennessee offense was silent that entire first half, and they really just let Trevor Etienne run all over the defense, which, I mean, Tennessee's defense was lacking last season as well. I think Tennessee and TCU, if they had better defenses last year and even this year, they would be great football teams. And they already are great football teams, but they would be, I mean, top 5 caliber football teams if their defense was able to step up for them, because they have some pretty good offenses at both those programs. But man, and then going back to Florida standpoint, Graham Mertz finally saw something good out of him. And then Trevor Etienne, younger brother of Travis, who's in the NFL playing for the Jaguars. Jacksonville just lost today. But what I have heard is that Travis and Trevor, they are very close with each other. I mean, Travis is always tweeting out about Trevor's performance on the field. And, I mean, if ETN keeps this up, we might have another 2 backs duo with brothers, because there's not really a lot of them. I know there's James Cook and Dalvin Cook.
That's about it. I mean, Trayvon Diggs and Stephon Diggs, but those are different positions, obviously. But there's not a lot of brothers. Obviously, the most known one probably Jason Kelsey and Travis Kelsey, but there's not a lot. So that's why I mentioned you'd really like to see Trevor Etienne get drafted, and I wouldn't be surprised because he's fallen under the radar. He's definitely no top prospect, but he's very good. He's a very solid running back.
Very solid running back. And we've seen some good running backs. I will say, there are some great running backs in college football, including Blake Corum, who continues to destroy for the Michigan offense, as in their game against Bowling Green. He had 101 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on only 12 rushing attempts. I mean, Blake Corum continues to make his case for the Heisman, which I obviously don't think he will, just because there are some really good quarterbacks that are up there to win it. We're talking about Caleb Williams, Jordan Travis, Drake May, maybe even Bo Nix, who's playing great for the Ducks right now. I just don't see any other position but quarterback winning Heisman this year. But if it was going to be anyone else, I'd say either Blake Corum or Marvin Harrison out of Ohio State, because Corum, 100 rushing yards. Marvin Harrison, that Ohio State team, they started off pretty slow against Western Kentucky, and this was the 3rd game in a row. We're like, okay, Ohio State, they're struggling. Finally, we get something good out of them. 63-10 win over the Hilltoppers. Marvin Harrison, 126 receiving yards. Even Travion Henderson for the Buckeyes had 88 yards on the ground. Kyle McCord looked very solid for Ohio State. But in general, we look at the rankings as well. Not a lot of movement in the top 10 other than Texas and Florida State switching. So the Longhorns are now ranked third in the country. And after Florida State's close call, they moved down to 4. Ohio State, USC, and Penn State still say at 7, 6, and 5. But Oregon takes a big leap. And Ryan, I do want to ask you, like, Bo Nix, I think, is a great quarterback. 247 passing yards against Hawaii. And I think that the Ducks could possibly make the postseason. I really do believe that Oregon is a caliber college football or college playoff team. So do you believe the same with me? Because I feel like this Oregon team, I mean, you look at their schedule too. They've got some quality games on here. They play Colorado next week. They got to go on the road to Stanford. They got to go on the road to play Washington. But since Oregon has really taken this much of a leap, I think these are winnable games. And their hardest game, that the biggest test for them is when they host the Trojans.
Yeah, it's going to be very fun to see Oregon versus USC. Going to be a great game. And also, USC has some great opponents. They're playing against Colorado and Oregon. There's some great talent in the Pac-12. And to answer your question, I do think that Oregon could make the college football playoff, but it's just so early to tell. I mean, there's so many great teams, and there has not been too much crazy stuff to happen so far in college football, but that's how it usually starts. I mean, conference play is starting soon. We're getting week 4 this upcoming Saturday in 6 days. It's going to be a very fun Saturday, and this is when things start to really go down. This is where the drama starts to happen. But I think that Bo Nix and the Oregon Ducks definitely have a chance at the college football playoff. And on Saturday, I would have said before the Colorado game that there's 3 teams with a legitimate shot. But now with Colorado, we'll talk about that in a moment, they barely beat Colorado State, who's unranked and not a very good football team. They're very mid, below average, and they barely beat them. They took them to 2 overtimes. So I think there's only 2 legitimate teams now in the Pac-12. And don't get me wrong, that Colorado win over TCU was very big, but still, I don't think Colorado's legit anymore unless they can really do something against USC this upcoming week.
Some of the things I will give Colorado just because, it's a rivalry game, so your rival's probably going to know you that well. They're going to bring the intensity, which is certainly brought by Colorado State. I give a lot of credit for them. I mean, Nicolosi for the Rams looked really good at quarterback for them the entire game. Honestly, I think he outperformed Shadir Sanders. And, I mean, getting Travis Hunter out of the game, that was definitely their number one job. And that guy's job who did hit Travis Hunter to get him out of the game and to give them a chance to win, which it's dirty, but that's how some teams try to win football games. And I've seen it even in basketball. We go back to March Madness, and I'm a Duke Blue Devils fan, but I clearly saw that when we played Tennessee in the second round, that all they were trying to do is injure Kyle Filipowski. I mean, he was bleeding almost out of his eye socket that game. They were really going after him, and it's dirty to play the game like that. I don't like when players do. I mean, I don't really like the Colorado State coach either. He got a little bit of fame this week, because they're trying to hype up Deion Sanders' primetime game, and then they're trying to get Colorado State's coach involved a little bit, and he's finally getting to talk a little smack that everyone's going to hear. And I mean, the clout, it worked. Everyone wanted to watch that game. And I don't know, man. I just feel like Colorado State could be I really think that was a really good performance, but it was definitely a fluke. I don't see Colorado State doing something like that ever again. And then for Colorado, they're going to be without Travis Hunter for a few weeks from what I've heard. But if you can beat Oregon, if Colorado puts up a good fight against Oregon or maybe beats them, like, I don't know how I can't talk about college football player for them, but I completely agree with what you said. We're going to have to wait for that game next Saturday because that's going to be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, I mean, you do have a point with Colorado State knowing Colorado very well, but still, I mean, if Colorado's a legit team, no matter who's injured, who's not injured, they should still be able to take down Colorado State. I think it was just a disappointing performance overall. Colorado's still going to be ranked, and they can prove that they are legit. If they could at least if they lose to USC, you'd still have to prove that you're legit if you could only lose by under double digits. If they could lose by just a touchdown, I'd still be impressed with them since USC is a very good team. But yeah, I'm just not too sure on how I feel about Colorado right now, especially with more so how good TCU actually is, how good of a win that actually is for Colorado against TCU because TCU's defense looked really bad, and they're not the same anymore without Quentin Johnson. I don't think they're not the team that they were last year.
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, the offense for TCU has always been great. Their defense was always lacking. I mean, we I know obviously we saw it in the national championship game, but even you go to the semifinal game against Michigan, they still give up 45 points. They still give up touchdown here and there. TCU's offense is what took them to the playoffs last year. It was not the defense at all. And the defense was lacking so bad. There were some small schools that were not ranked that had a better defense than TCU last year. And I mean, it was proven again this year because there were not a lot of changes in the draft because obviously they don't have the best quality players on the other side of the football. But there were not a lot of changes, and then Colorado definitely took advantage of it. But it will be very interesting to see how Colorado's season turns out. But let's move on a little bit because we did get one good upset, and it came on a 61-yard field goal by Missouri kicker Harrison Mevis as they took down number 15 Kansas State at the buzzer, 30-27 being the final score. That was one of the upsets that were actually completed. But Ryan, I think we can also call this one an upset with Alabama only beating South Florida 17-3. I mean,
Yeah.
17-3 against South Florida, and you're Alabama. You had to turn to your third string quarterback in this game because they benched Jalen Milroe. Buckner started the game. He got benched. And then Ty Simpson finished the job for the Crimson Tide. I mean, Ryan, what are your thoughts? And how concerning is this quarterback situation to you for the Crimson Tide?
Yeah, it looks very concerning, but the first thing that came to my mind when I saw this was that one, I don't know how South Florida's doing this because this is not a great South Florida team, a team that's really going to surprise you. They still lost big to Western Kentucky in week 1 and they beat Florida A&M, but only by 14 points. So this is not a much improved South Florida team, but South Florida's had some terrible teams in the past. They've been at the bottom of the American Conference. And now, this is not even a better South Florida team. This is still a really bad South Florida Bulls team. And now Alabama all of a sudden is struggling to a very weak team. No matter how good South Florida is, Bama should always take care of business against them no matter what. But I mean, that was just shocking. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was tied 3-3 at the half. Bama couldn't score a touchdown until they scored one touchdown in the third and one touchdown in the fourth. I mean, Bama's defense looks good as usual, but the offense looks awful. Their leader in passing yards was Ty Simpson. He went 5 for 9 in pass attempts with just 73 yards. They used 3 different quarterbacks, as you said. It was a mess for the Crimson Tide, and the first thing that came to my mind outside of South Florida not really even being that good and Alabama struggling against them is that Alabama, is the dynasty over for the Crimson Tide? I mean, they were by far the best. Them and Georgia were by far the best team in college football for at least half a decade from 2015 to 2021 or so, or 2022 even. Alabama was dominant, and now they don't even look that good coming off a loss against Texas. And then if you're an Alabama fan or just college football fan, you consider this a loss from Alabama. You could only beating South Florida by 14 points and being tied with them 3-3 and not scoring a touchdown against them at the half. This is a loss for Alabama. They are not a good team anymore. If that was against a team any better than South Florida, a Power 5 team, or even a really good Group of 5 team, I think Alabama probably loses that way with the way that they played. Credit to South Florida's defense for holding Alabama to just 3 points in the first half and only 17 in the entire game. That is crazy.
In South Florida, they have a brand new head coach at the helm. They're playing at a rainy Raymond James Stadium, which is home of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And yet, despite how awful they were, I mean, their quarterback went 14 for 28, 87 yards, and an interception. For how horrible they played. And they almost won this football game. Just watching this game, it bugged me so much. Because it felt like one South Florida touchdown and they win this game.
Yeah, I wish South Florida would have scored a touchdown. I was not watching this game, but I was following it on my phone while I was at the Marlins game and coming back in the car. I was like, South Florida really has a chance to win this. And of course, they're not going to score much points off the Bama defense. It's still Alabama, but it's stunning how bad Alabama looks, especially against like I said, a very weak South Florida team that maybe is a tiny bit better than they were a few years ago, but they're still one of the worst Power Five. I mean, not Power Five, FBS programs in all of college football. I don't think they made a bowl game in at least half a decade, maybe even a full decade. They're always below 500. This makes no sense. And I want to see what Nick Saban. I got to listen to Nick Saban's press conference. I did not get to that, but I'm going to listen to Nick Saban's press conference tonight because that is crazy. I mean, that's only beating South Florida by 14 is arguably worse than Clemson losing to Duke. I mean, that's pathetic.
Yeah, South Florida, I believe they made a bowl game maybe 6 years ago, but like that's maybe
yeah, still, I said half a decade. Like
it's been
they're
while.
not a good program. They're nowhere near Alabama, nowhere near any Power 5 school. They're one of the worst FBS teams.
And I do consider the final score being 10-3 because if you were following the game, Alabama scored a touchdown the final 30 seconds. They were just trying to run out the clock and end it. So really, like I'm saying, South Florida, they score one touchdown, and this is one of the biggest upsets of all time.
Yeah.
Like they really came close this game. Alabama, I don't know how to feel. I mean, you guys,
they score a touchdown, and that's up there with Appalachian State, Michigan, and stuff like that, and Stanford, USC, like back in 2007. Like that's man, I wish South Florida could have won this game because I'm not a South Florida fan, but I was rooting for them because, I live in South Florida, even though, funny enough, South Florida isn't even in South Florida. It's in West Florida, Central Florida, near Tampa. Orlando. Yeah. It's I don't know why it's called South Florida. That should be FAU, but whatever.
Well, it's also the same thing with Wake Forest. They're technically not in like Wake Forest, North Carolina. They're in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, a little town. So it's kind of weird. But I will say this for looking at some of the Carolina teams, North Carolina and Duke being back-to-back in the polls at 17 and 18 is kind of absurd to me to see. And the Tar Heels got a big win over Minnesota. Duke took care of business and their win over Northwestern. I mean, both those teams are good, man. Both of those teams are really good. North Carolina, I feel like maybe should be a little higher, but I definitely give them some time to move up in the polls. LSU got a respectful win over Mississippi State. Jaden Daniels looked great in that game for the Tigers, and they needed some confidence booster out of him. I mean, that Florida State game in week 1 tore down a lot of confidence for the entire team, not even just Jaden Daniels. Overall, I like how it looks. I'm happy Florida is back in the rankings. They're taking 25. Clemson was just under them. They're pretty much ranked 26th. And Kansas State fell out after they got upset. They're the only team to fall out of the rankings as Tennessee moved from 11 to 23. So let's go ahead and move away from college football. And let's go ahead and recap this NFL Sunday that we've had so far because we still have Sunday Night Football going on right now with the Dolphins and the Patriots. But there were some very good games. I mean, we got to see Marcus's Atlanta Falcons beat William Batten's Packers. I mean, that was a fun game to watch. I know Bijan at 130 rushing yards. Drake London on my fantasy team finally did something because last week, 0 receptions against Carolina. He did something this week. It helped a lot. The Bills blew out the Raiders. The Ravens took care of business against the Bengals. And we're going to come back to the Bengals in just a second because I am so lost on this team right now. And then the Seahawks-Lions series that has been going on for the last few, like last year, Seattle won 48-45. This year, Seattle wins on a walk-off touchdown. Geno Smith to Tyler Lockett in overtime, 37-31 victory. Nick Bears Chargers choke again as the Titans beat LA 27-24. Marcus's Bears are the worst team in the NFL. The Buccaneers beat them. Patrick Mahomes on his birthday edged out a victory. So we'll get to some of the other games in just a second. But, Ryan, I want to go to this Bengals game because Joe Burrow in these last 2 games has looked horrendous. 27 for 41, 222 passing yards, 2 touchdowns and interception. That looks all right. But all those stats were pretty much the second half. Joe Burrow, through the first and second quarter, only had like 30 or 40 passing yards, and that was his stat line. So I need to ask you, what is wrong with the Cincinnati Bengals right now? And do you believe it is that calf injury that Joe Burrow had during training camp?
Yeah, I think it probably is because he missed the majority of training camp, and just history shows if you're gonna miss the majority of training camp, then you're probably not gonna be on the same page as your team. And there's some exceptions, like Chris Jones had a great game for the Chiefs today after missing all of training camp and Week 1. But like, if it especially applies to the quarterback, like it's definitely concerning for the Bengals what's going on. But you got to remember something. Last year, the Cincinnati Bengals also started out 0-2. They lost to the Steelers in Week 1 and then the Cowboys in Week 2. And then they went on a roll from there, beating the Jets, the Dolphins, losing to the Ravens, but then beating the Saints, Falcons, losing to the Browns, actually, but then beating the Panthers, Steelers, Titans, and the Chiefs, and then the Browns going on a really big winning streak to end the season, beating the Buccaneers, Patriots as well, and the Ravens, and that led them all the way into the playoffs, that big winning streak. So I would not count the Bengals out of it. This team still has a ton of talent. Jamar Chase off to a slow start. T. Higgins had a good game today, finally getting the Bengals a touchdown. And but with Jamar, Higgins, Boyd, and still having Mixon too, if Joe Burrow starts to get going, which I think he will, starting next week in Week 3, then I think the Cincinnati Bengals team still has a chance to win this AFC North and, more importantly, just get into the playoffs and then go from there, because this Bengals team, in my opinion, is only going to improve from week to week as the season rolls on, just because Burrow is still getting used to the offense, even though it's still a lot of returning players. It's just Burrow missing a lot of training camp really hurts them.
Yeah, and I guess I can agree with that a little bit, because if you look back at last year's 0-2 start, I mean, the Bengals lost to Mitchell Trubisky's Pittsburgh Steelers and Cooper Rush's Dallas Cowboys. At least this year, he's lost to some quality quarterbacks. He lost to Lamar Jackson, and I'm lost because this guy gets a bag and then plays this, and this just shows what we've been talking about, that players, when they get a big contract, can start playing worse football. It's been proven, and I'm not going to go ahead and count out Joe Burrow the rest of his career just because he got the biggest contract in NFL history. But this is also going to affect the Bengals for years to come, because now T. Higgins hits the free agent market next year, and I really don't think the Bengals are going to be able to re-sign him, which gives the Panthers a chance to go out and get T. Higgins. There's been interest with Carolina going after T. Higgins, even in a trade possible this year. It'll likely be free agency because the Panthers do have cap room for next year. But the Bengals are going to lose a lot of talent after surrendering to Joe Burrow and giving him the bag.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. They'll still have Jamar Chase for a decent amount of time. Hopefully for the Bengals fans, they can get him to a long-term deal. And if Burrow starts playing better, you can hopefully see Burrow and Chase together in Cincinnati for the foreseeable future. But yeah, with Higgins hitting free agency, it doesn't look likely that he will re-sign, and especially with all the teams that will be looking for him, because, this day in the NFL, wide receiver is probably the most valuable position with the inconsistency of the running backs. Now, everyone wants a great receiver like T. Higgins, because T. Higgins could be a number one on at least 3/4 of NFL teams, but unfortunately for T, he plays with Jamar Chase, and Jamar Chase, if you exclude his start to the season, he is the second best receiver in the NFL. I think in general, not just based off this season, I think Tyreek Hill is better than Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson obviously being number one, but that's a whole unnecessary hot take that I'm making. But Tyreek's better than Chase, but Chase is still elite, and I don't care what you say. It's 2 games. Everyone wants a trade in my fantasy league, but Chase is still good, and I'll gladly take Jamar Chase if I don't have to give up too much, because I know he'll start to perform once Joe Burrow starts to settle in a little bit.
Yeah, I can definitely see what you mean by the Tyreek Hill over Jamar Chase. I certainly right now I'd take Tyreek Hill over Jamar Chase.
Yeah, Tyreek just caught for another touchdown, and the Dolphins are up 17-3 right now, and the Patriots, their defense is looking a lot better.
And to go with those scoring, let's look at some of the other scores from today. We just mentioned Patrick Mahomes winning on his birthday today in a close battle with the Jaguars, getting their first win of the season. Anthony Richardson had 2 rushing touchdowns today for the Colts as they beat C.J. Stroud and the Texans 31-20. But Anthony Richardson did leave this game with a concussion. He did not return. That is something to look out for the number 4, the 4th overall pick in the 2023 NFL draft. CJ Stroud looked really good for the Texans despite the loss. 384 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns. I mean, he's utilizing Nico Collins as his wide receiver, 7 receptions, 146 yards, and a receiving touchdown. Gardner Minshew did get the job done for the Colts, but man, Anthony Richardson runs like Cam Newton, and it's fun to watch. Obviously, I hope he's okay with the whole concussion injury that he and the big hit he took. But if you're going to run the football that much, you're going to have to – you got to be careful while running. That's honestly why the longevity of Cam Newton's career was cut short, is because he took so many hits. And that's why I get nervous watching Josh Allen, because he hurdles over defenders. He's lowering his shoulder. Like, in a few years, it's going to catch up to you. It caught up to Cam Newton really fast, and it shortened his NFL career. So just a little careful on the hits is what I say for Anthony Richardson. But he's a great quarterback. And then the 49ers continue to show why they're the team to beat. They leave LA with a statement 30-23 win, sending Declan Ney back home, as Christian McCaffrey had 116 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Matthew Stafford looked pretty good, but Puka Nacua, 15 receptions for 147 yards. This is definitely one of the best young wide receivers in the NFL, Ryan.
Yeah, nobody had this on their radar going into the season. He was in pretty much no fantasy leagues, and now all of a sudden he is the hot player in the waiver wire. I did not pick him up, unfortunately. I thought it was just a fluke for him, but with Cooper Kupp out again this week, he used this opportunity and he shined. He took advantage of it, and the Rams, despite losing to the 49ers, they look very, very solid after winning their week 1 game. And I think that Puka Nacua, we'll still have to see. I'm not sure if he's legit or if this is just an insane Linsanity run for 2 or 3 games. We'll just have to see how many targets he'll get once Cooper Kupp comes back. But this is certainly a story, because nobody knew who this guy was, and all of a sudden now he's at the top of the league with Tyreek Hill in receptions and receiving yards.
Yeah, it's honestly very interesting. Unfortunately for me, I'm playing Samuel in fantasy football this week. He had T. Higgins, who had about 30 fantasy points, and of course he started Puka Nacua. So I'm kind of screwed in that game, because I benched Nico Collins and Brian Robinson, which the Commanders got a 35-33 victory over the Broncos. So
Barely escaped
it, but man, this Sean Payton, I don't know what's up with Russell Wilson. I don't want to even say it's Sean Payton's fault, because Sean Payton has not coached in a few years, and he's trying to rebuild this Broncos team. But man, I don't know what it is with Russell Wilson. I guess he did have a really good game, 308 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and an interception. It's just, you can't give up 35 points to Sam Howell and the Washington Commanders and expect to win.
Yeah, I mean, the Broncos tried to make a miraculous comeback. They were down by 2 possessions with barely any time left, like under 3 minutes, and then they score a field goal. They go for the onside kick down by 8. They don't get it after it looked like they could get it. It took a good bounce. They had a chance, but ultimately the Commanders were able to recover it. They were forced to a 3-and-out. The Broncos got the ball with like 40 seconds left, time for a few plays, and from about midfield, Russell Wilson took a shot, and it was a miracle play. They got the touchdown, but they were not able to get the 2-point conversion. Boy, that would have been quite some story if the Denver Broncos could have won that game and got the 2-point conversion and then ended up winning in overtime. But a great miracle that the Broncos were even able to come back and only lose that game by 2. But yeah, they're going to have to make some adjustments on defense, because you cannot give up 35 points to the Commanders, like you said, and expect to win a football game, because defense wins championships, but more importantly, defense wins football games. And we saw that with my New York Giants. Their defense was locked down in the second half, holding the Arizona Cardinals to just 1 touchdown after giving up 20 in the first half. And as good as Daniel Jones was in that game, it was the defense that won it for them.
Yeah, but I want to leave Giants-Cardinals as the last game we talk about, because I know Kalen's probably saying this is our year with the Cowboys' 30-10 victory over the New York Giants. I mean, Sauce Gardner terminated his Twitter account after this game. I mean, it's a whole fiasco for the Jets. I really wish Aaron Rodgers was playing football right now for them, because I was really excited to watch Aaron Rodgers throw the football to Garrett Wilson, that Aaron Rodgers handed off to Dalvin Cook, and all the confidence around this team. It sucks that he's not there, but dude, the Cowboys look great. And I'm not buying into this that Dallas is going to the Super Bowl. This is our year. I'm not buying into this. This is probably one of the best seasons Dak Prescott is having so far. And I don't want to completely end it right here by saying like this is a great year, blah blah blah. If the Cowboys can really keep this up, they're going to be one of the best teams to beat. There's already the 49ers. I mean, obviously you got the Chiefs, the Bills, hopefully the Bengals soon. They got to get back on track. But the Cowboys are definitely one of the teams to beat right now.
Yeah, the Cowboys look great. They have an amazing defense led by Zach Martin, and Micah Parsons, of course, and Trayvon Diggs. And they're going with a more conservative approach this year. Now, Zeke is out of town. Tony Pollard is the RB1, getting pretty much all the carries. And they're just handing the ball off to Pollard. And with a good offensive line and a great defense, they don't need to pass too much. And it's a great way to win football games. And I'm really liking it for the Dallas Cowboys. Also decreases the chance of injury for Dak Prescott now that the O-line has improved, and they will be handing off the ball a little bit more because Tony Pollard is turning into a superstar. He looks really good for the Dallas Cowboys early on. And the Cowboys are just finding ways to win the football games, and even with a very talented offense, they don't need to do too much because that defense is amazing. They shut out the Giants in the first game. Before the Giants offense came alive today in the second half of their game in Arizona. But boy, that Cowboys defense is one of the best defenses we have seen from any team in quite a few years. I mean, that's by far the best defense in football. I think the only team that would put up a fight against the Cowboys defense is probably the 49ers defense led by Fred Warner and Nick Bosa. But other than that, the Cowboys defense is amazing this year. They're going to get a ton of sacks, and I definitely would be shocked if the Cowboys defense is not the leader in sacks this year.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But then even offensively, like you pointed out, they are dominant. Tony Pollard, 25 carries for 72 yards. CeeDee Lamb, 11 receptions for 143 yards. And then Dak Prescott slinging it, 255 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. And we'll look at this final game right here because we're going to talk about the Dolphins-Patriots game in our next podcast as it's going on right now. The Giants were down so much in this game. I believe it was 28-7 at one point in the third quarter. Came all the way back to win this football game. And Ryan, I'll let you kind of go into depth since you were probably watching more of this game than me. But just, man, what a game for the Giants. And then obviously Saquon went down. That is a big headline as well. But all in all, the Giants did have to win with the cost.
Yeah, this was the game of the week, and everyone was so worried about the Giants after the first half when they still failed to score points. That was 6 consecutive quarters of not scoring, as I mentioned earlier on the podcast. And then all of a sudden, Dable has probably a crazy talk with them in the locker room. I want to know what he said because he must have put some fire into them because they started making tackles. And every wide receiver started making some incredible catches. Darius Slayton made an amazing catch. So did Jalen Hyatt. Like, everyone just started playing, and it was a team win ultimately. All their production came in the second half. And a great game from linebacker Bobby Okereke. And the whole defense was bad in the first half. They were all sleeping. Dexter Lawrence wasn't doing anything on the defensive line. And then everyone comes alive in the second half, and just a miracle win for the New York Giants. And that was their biggest comeback win since 1949, and probably in the top 3 biggest comeback wins in 99 years of New York Giants football. What a win for the Giants. And you mentioned, I guess you remember that game when Daniel Jones made the comeback against Tampa in his first game. I was at that game. I was sitting really close to the field, and Daniel Jones in the second half, he just came alive. A big rushing touchdown as well for Jones. And this Giants team in the second half looked like what we expected them to be. And I would be surprised if we beat the Niners next week now without Saquon Barkley. But this team, if they could play like how they did in the second half against the Cardinals, they could be legit, I think. I don't know what the heck was happening with them in their first 3 halves of football this season, but I still think this team has the potential to make some noise. I don't think they're anywhere near as good as the Cowboys or the Eagles. They're definitely a step below them. Maybe not the Eagles because they've looked like they've came off to a little bit of a slow start, but the Cowboys look great. They're a lot of people's NFC East favorites now, but I don't know. Don't sleep on the Giants to maybe sneak into a wild card spot this year. They still got a long way to go. But Saquon Barkley, he got injured, and the MRI says that he did not break anything. So it's probably a high ankle sprain, which could put him out for about a month. He's definitely not going to play in Thursday Night Football, as he was in a lot of frustration coming off the field. He had to get a lot of help coming off the field, 2 guys to help him walk off. He didn't even walk off. They brought him off, did not cart him off, but they helped him off onto the sideline. And he was limping on the sideline, so he was able to walk a little bit, which is a good sign. Definitely nothing broken, as we saw later from the MRI, but he could definitely be
Yeah, I think you glitched out, Ryan. Yeah, I'm gonna put him backstage for a second. Hold on. You there?
All right, I'm back. How much of that did you hear?
Like, I missed the last 10 seconds of it.
Did you hear when I started talking about Saquon?
I did. I just missed after you're talking about.
Okay,
Saquon.
yeah. What I was saying is that we saw him get help off the field, and then he was frustrated, but he was able to limp a little bit to help support his team make the comeback win from the sidelines. And the MRI confirmed that he didn't break anything. So yeah, most likely a high ankle sprain. He'll be out at least for Thursday Night Football against the 49ers coming up in week 3. So Matt Breida will start that game against his former team, but hopefully for Barkley not too long, because he is the heart and soul of this New York Giants team.
And we'll be ready for Thursday Night Football, but this is going to wrap up our podcast. And don't just worry about Thursday Night Football, because tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, the CarolinaCast is going live. The Carolina Panthers are back on Monday Night Football. They host their division rival and the New Orleans Saints tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, live on the CarolinaCast. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. We are on the road to 2,000 subscribers. If you want to follow us on Instagram or TikTok, we are at CarolinaCast Sports. For our Twitter/X, we are CarolinaCast_15. Thank you all for tuning in to the CarolinaCast Podcast, Season 2, Episode 4. I'm Krish Verma alongside Ryan Schlesinger, and we will see you all in our next episode.